In the marble corridors of a Venetian palazzo, as champagne glasses clinked and designer gowns rustled against ancient stone, a single photograph was being taken. Not by the official wedding photographers, not by the paparazzi lurking in gondolas outside, but by a man in an expensive suit who nobody questioned. The image captured seemed innocent enough. Lauren Sanchez laughing with a tech mogul's wife, their heads tilted together in what appeared to be casual conversation. But that photograph would later become Exhibit A in the most brutal billionaire divorce in history. Because what looked like a moment of celebration was actually the final piece of evidence Jeff Bezos needed to trigger the 5 billion boomerang. A clause so devastating that legal experts now study it as the perfect weapon of financial destruction. The whisper captured in that photo, 3 words that would cost Lauren everything she thought she had secured. 3 words that would expose the most sophisticated revenge plot ever orchestrated by the world's richest man. And 3 words that proved love, in the world of the ultra-wealthy, is nothing more than a carefully calculated contract waiting to be broken. This is not the fairy tale the world thought it witnessed. This is the untold story of how a wedding became a crime scene, how romance became warfare, and how 2 words, too late, became the most expensive phrase ever spoken. The perfect storm. The wedding of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez was supposed to be the ultimate power couple triumph. Venice sparkled with imported Parisian chandeliers worth $2-3 million, custom Valentino gowns that required 6 months of hand-stitching, and a guest list that read like a who's who of global influence. Every detail was orchestrated to perfection, from the hand-picked roses flown in from Ecuador to the private orchestra conducted by a Grammy winner whose fee alone exceeded most people's annual salaries. But behind the glittering facade, something far more sinister was unfolding. While guests assumed they were witnessing a celebration of love, they were actually participants in the most elaborate evidence-gathering operation in modern history. Every smile was being catalogued by a team of forensic photographers. Every conversation was being recorded through sophisticated audio equipment disguised as decorative elements. Every interaction was being filed away for future use by a battalion of private investigators who had been embedded among the staff. Because Jeff Bezos, the man who built Amazon from a garage into a trillion-dollar empire, doesn't do anything without a plan. And this wedding wasn't the end of a romantic journey. It was the beginning of a masterpiece of strategic destruction that would take months to fully execute. Those who worked closely with Bezos during this period describe him as unnaturally calm, almost serene, like a chess grandmaster who had already calculated the endgame while his opponent was still admiring the board. The prenuptial agreement alone took nearly 18 months to craft, with 5 separate law firms working in isolation to prevent any single entity from understanding the full scope of the document. Teams of the world's most ruthless attorneys worked around the clock, constructing what one legal expert described as the Mona Lisa of financial warfare. At 847 pages, it wasn't just a contract, it was a blueprint for annihilation disguised as protection. The document was so complex that it required its own index, cross-references, and appendices that detailed everything from social media, posting guidelines to the precise definition of what constituted public association with competitors. Hidden within its dense legal language were 7 trigger clauses that could instantly strip Lauren of everything. Not just money, but access, influence, and even the right to tell her own story. The 7 deadly clauses. The most devastating was nicknamed the 5 billion boomerang, a provision so precise that it could be activated by something as simple as an unauthorized Instagram post or a magazine interview that implied she was leveraging her marriage for personal gain. This clause alone took 6 months to perfect, with teams of behavioral psychologists consulted to predict every possible scenario where Lauren might unknowingly violate its terms. The second clause, known internally as the Silence Protocol, prevented Lauren from writing, publishing, or collaborating on any memoir, article, or documentary about the relationship without written permission. Violation would not only void her financial claims, but impose penalties so severe they could bankrupt her entirely. The third, The image trap restricted her ability to use the marriage as leverage for branding. Every public appearance, every endorsement, every photo shoot could be interpreted as a violation. The language was so broad that even attending charity events could be construed as leveraging her status for personal gain. The fourth clause, the circle of isolation, barred her from maintaining business or personal ties with any individual considered a rival to Bezos. The definition of rival was deliberately vague, encompassing not just direct competitors, but anyone who might pose a future threat to any of Bezos's interests. The fifth, the political muzzle, prevented Lauren from engaging in political fundraising or advocacy that could create the appearance of influence through marriage. Given Bezos's extensive political connections, this effectively silenced her on virtually every public issue. The sixth, the inheritance void, structured assets in such a way that nothing could pass to Lauren without strict oversight and approval from a board controlled entirely by Bezos's appointees. And the seventh, the most chilling of all, was the cascade provision, which ensured that violating any single clause would automatically trigger all the others, creating a domino effect of total financial and social destruction. One attorney who reviewed portions of the document said, "I've seen hostile corporate takeovers with fewer restrictions. This wasn't a marriage agreement. It was a predator's contract disguised as romance. The entrapment." But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Lauren didn't just unknowingly violate these clauses. She was encouraged to. Sources now reveal that Bezos deliberately created situations where Lauren would be tempted to step over the invisible lines he had drawn. Social events where photographers accidentally captured her in compromising positions. Business opportunities that seemed legitimate but were actually elaborate traps designed to gather evidence. For instance, Lauren received what appeared to be a lucrative offer to become the face of a luxury skincare brand. The contract seemed straightforward, the money substantial, and the brand prestigious. What she didn't know was that the company was partially owned by a shell corporation controlled by one of Bezos's business rivals. Simply signing the endorsement deal would have triggered 3 separate clauses in their prenuptial agreement. Similarly, she was repeatedly invited to speak at women's empowerment conferences, opportunities that seemed perfectly aligned with her interests and values. But each invitation was carefully orchestrated to create situations where she might inadvertently violate the political advocacy restrictions in their contract. Interview requests that appeared flattering but were designed to gather evidence became a regular occurrence. Journalists, many of whom were unaware they were being used as tools in a larger strategy, would ask seemingly innocent questions about her business plans, her philanthropic interests, or her thoughts on various social issues. Each answer was analyzed by teams of lawyers looking for contract violations. The surveillance state. For 11 months after their wedding, Lauren lived in a golden cage, unaware that every move was being documented by a team of private investigators, forensic accountants, and social media analysts. Her phone calls were monitored through legal but invasive means. Her emails were scanned by sophisticated algorithms looking for key phrases that might indicate contract violations. Her social media posts were analyzed not just for content, but for metadata that could reveal her location, her associations, and her intentions. The surveillance wasn't limited to digital monitoring. Household staff at their various properties were required to submit daily reports about Lauren's activities, her visitors, and even her mood. Security personnel were instructed to document not just security threats, but any interaction Lauren had with individuals on a constantly updated list of persons of interest. Personal trainers, stylists, and assistants who worked with Lauren were required to sign their own non-disclosure agreements that included provisions about reporting any suspicious behavior or conversations. Many of these individuals were unaware that they were essentially functioning as informants in an elaborate intelligence operation. She thought she was building her brand as a billionaire's wife, attending charity galas, launching business ventures, and cultivating the kind of high-profile relationships that define success in elite circles. In reality, she was constructing her own prosecution file, adding evidence with every photo opportunity, every business meeting, and every social interaction. The Monaco trap. The triggering incident came at a charity gala in Monaco, an event that seemed like the perfect opportunity for Lauren to shine in her role as a philanthropic power player. The gala, ostensibly supporting ocean conservation, attracted the kind of A-list crowd that made for perfect photo opportunities and networking possibilities. Lauren, radiant in a 200 custom Elisab gown that had taken 3 fittings to perfect, was photographed in what appeared to be an intimate conversation with Elena Morrison, wife of tech mogul David Morrison, one of Bezos's most bitter business rivals. To observers, it looked like harmless socializing between 2 powerful women. To Bezos's surveillance team, it was the smoking gun they had been waiting for. The photograph captured Lauren leaning in close as Elena whispered something in her ear. The moment seemed spontaneous, the kind of candid interaction that happens naturally at social events. But investigators later revealed that Elena's presence at the gala wasn't coincidental. She had been invited specifically by organizers who were unaware that they were facilitating an elaborate sting operation. Professional lip readers, hired specifically for this purpose, later determined the 3 words that would destroy everything: David's next acquisition. It was insider information about Morrison's planned purchase of a satellite company that would directly compete with Bezos's space ventures. And Lauren had not only received this information, she had been caught on camera, acknowledging it with a knowing smile and what appeared to be a follow-up question. What made this particularly devastating was that Lauren had no idea she was receiving insider information. Elena had presented the conversation as casual gossip, the kind of harmless industry chatter that flows freely at elite social events. But the legal implications were enormous. Simply receiving such information, even unknowingly, constituted a violation of the confidentiality clauses in Lauren's prenuptial agreement. The execution. Within 72 hours, the machine of destruction was in motion, with the precision of a military operation and the resources of a small nation. The legal assault began at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. While Lauren slept in their $165 million Beverly Hills estate, teams of attorneys were filing motions in courts across 3 states. The coordination was flawless. Each filing was timed to maximize impact while minimizing Lauren's ability to respond effectively. By the time she woke up at 7:30 a.m. to her usual routine of yoga and coffee, her credit cards had been frozen through a complex web of corporate ownership structures that made it nearly impossible to challenge the action quickly. Her business accounts were locked based on claims of potential community property violations. Cease and desist letters were being delivered to every brand partnership she had cultivated, each letter backed by teams of lawyers who made it clear that association with Lauren now carried significant legal risks. The financial warfare was comprehensive and devastating. Properties Lauren thought were jointly owned turned out to be held in complex trust structures that she had unknowingly signed away rights to during their marriage. Art collections she had helped curate and believed she partially owned were revealed to be on permanent loan to foundations controlled entirely by Bezos. Even the jewelry he had given her during their marriage was technically owned by a subsidiary of Amazon, making her legally a thief if she didn't return every piece. But the financial assault was just the beginning. The real cruelty lay in the social demolition that followed, with surgical precision. The social assassination. Phone calls that had always been returned within hours suddenly went straight to voicemail, with return calls that never came. Invitations that had once been abundant simply stopped arriving, leaving Lauren's calendar increasingly empty. PR agencies that had courted her partnership began declining to represent her, citing scheduling conflicts and strategic differences that everyone knew were polite lies covering their fear of crossing Bezos. The psychological precision was breathtaking. Bezos never spoke publicly about the divorce. He never issued statements or made accusations. He never appeared angry or vindictive in public. Instead, his silence became its own weapon, more powerful than any public relations campaign could have been. In elite circles, where perception is reality and reputation is currency, the absence of denial became confirmation of guilt. The missing invitations became proof of unworthiness. The cancelled partnerships became evidence of untrustworthiness. When the most powerful man in the world stops associating with someone, others assume there must be a good reason. One Hollywood insider described it as death by 1,000 paper cuts. Except each cut was a billion-dollar wound. Restaurants where Lauren had been a regular for years suddenly had no tables available for reservations. Personal shoppers who had competed for her business began returning her calls with apologies about being fully booked. Even her hairstylist and makeup artist, professionals who had worked with her for over a decade, quietly stopped accepting her appointments after receiving subtle pressure from other high-profile clients who made it clear that serving Lauren was incompatible with serving them. The legal labyrinth. Lauren's attempts to fight back only made things worse, like struggling in quicksand. Every lawyer she approached either declined her case outright or quoted fees so astronomical they seemed designed to bankrupt her before any real legal work could begin. Those few attorneys who did agree to represent her quickly discovered that opposing Bezos meant opposing an entire ecosystem of corporate power that extended far beyond any single individual. Legal experts estimate that Bezos spent over $300 million on the divorce proceedings, not because he had to, but because he could. It was a demonstration of what happens when unlimited resources meet unlimited ruthlessness. Every motion Lauren's legal team filed was met with counter-motions that were longer, more detailed, and backed by teams of specialists who could outlast and outspend any opposition. The custody battle over their shared investments and properties became particularly vicious, with every asset dissected through forensic accounting that revealed the true complexity of Bezos's financial empire. Bank accounts Lauren thought were joint were revealed to be individual accounts to which she had been given access that could be revoked at any time. Investment portfolios she believed she had helped build were structured through corporate entities where she held no actual ownership stake. The media siege. But the most devastating blow came when Lauren tried to leverage her story, believing that public sympathy might provide some protection against the legal and social assault she was facing. Publishers who had once begged for her memoir suddenly found their legal departments raising concerns about potential liability and confidentiality issues. Television producers who had pitched shows about powerful women abruptly cancelled their meetings, citing changes in network priorities that coincidentally aligned with their parent company's various business relationships with Amazon. Even her own social media accounts became evidence against her, with every post analyzed by teams of lawyers for potential violations of confidentiality clauses. Photos she had posted months or even years earlier were re-examined for any evidence of contract violations. Captions were scrutinized for hidden meanings. Even her likes and follows were catalogued as evidence of her associations and intentions. The isolation was complete and total. Former friends crossed streets to avoid her, fearful that even casual association might damage their own standing in elite circles. Charity boards quietly removed her from their rosters. Professional organizations revoked her memberships, citing technical violations of codes of conduct that had never been enforced before. The final humiliation. In the rarefied world of the ultra-wealthy, Lauren had become something worse than poor. She had become irrelevant. But Bezos wasn't finished. The final act of this elaborate revenge came 6 months after the divorce was finalized, when Lauren had been reduced to living in a modest apartment in West Hollywood and working as a freelance consultant for clients who paid a fraction of what she had once commanded. She received an envelope with no return address, delivered by a courier who disappeared before she could ask any questions. Inside was a single photograph, the image taken at their wedding of her laughing with Elena Morrison. The photo was printed on expensive paper, professionally mounted, and framed in elegant silver. On the back, in Bezos's distinctive handwriting, were 2 words: "Too late." It was then that Lauren realized the true scope of what had been done to her. The wedding she thought was the beginning of her fairy tale had actually been its ending. Every moment of happiness had been catalogued as evidence. Every gesture of love had been measured against contract provisions. Every dream she had shared had been transformed into a weapon against her. The man she had married hadn't just divorced her, he had erased her, not through violence or cruelty, but through the cold application of unlimited resources and meticulous planning. It was perhaps the most sophisticated destruction of a human being in modern history, carried out with the precision of a military operation and the ruthlessness of a corporate takeover. The legacy. Legal scholars now study the Bezos-Sanchez divorce as a masterclass in strategic warfare, teaching courses on how contract law can be weaponized beyond traditional legal boundaries. Business schools teach case studies on how Bezos used social influence and psychological manipulation to achieve total victory without ever appearing to be the aggressor. The 5 Billion Boomerang Clause has been copied and adapted by wealthy individuals around the world, creating a new category of prenuptial agreement that legal experts call scorched earth contracts. These documents don't just protect assets, they provide blueprints for the complete destruction of a former partner's life. But for Lauren Sanchez, it wasn't a case study or a legal precedent. It was the complete annihilation of everything she thought her life would become. And it all began with a single photograph, a whispered conversation, and a man who understood that in the world of billionaires, love is just another commodity to be bought, sold, and ultimately destroyed. The photograph that started it all now hangs in Bezos's private office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that in his world, there are no accidents, no coincidences, and no second chances. There are only contracts, consequences, and the cold satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. And, somewhere in West Hollywood, Lauren Sanchez stares at her phone, waiting for calls that will never come, understanding finally that some games are rigged from the very beginning. The fairy tale was always an illusion. The wedding was always a trap. And those two words, too late, were always the only ending this story could have. In the end, the most expensive whisper in history wasn't about money or business or secrets. It was about power. The power to create, to destroy, and to reduce a human being to nothing more than a cautionary tale told in the marble corridors of Venetian palazzos, where even fairy tales come with price tags that few can afford to pay.